Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, January 6th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Biden to approve massive weapons sale to Israel. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone. He wrote this up on Saturday. So before President Joe Biden leaves office, he will approve one more massive arms sale to Israel. The $8 billion sale of missiles and artillery shells comes as human rights groups have labeled Israel's war in Gaza as a genocide. So Axios reported on Friday that the State Department has notified Congress informally of an $8 billion proposed arms deal with Israel that will include munitions for fighter jets and attack helicopters as well as artillery shells. And usually the informally means that they notify Congress before they formally approve it, so Congress kind of has a heads up about what they're going to push forward, and they usually do that a couple weeks before. So this is going to be one of Biden's last moves here. Again, after all these human rights groups called this label what's happening in Gaza a genocide, all these phony claims from Biden officials that they're concerned about civilians being killed in Gaza. This is one of his last moves here, is to push through this massive sale. And this includes AIM-120C air-to-air missiles, Hellfire missiles, 155 millimeter artillery rounds, small diameter bombs, JDAM kits, and 500-pound bombs. Many of these munitions have been used by Israel during its campaign of extermination in Gaza, including in attacks on civilian targets. So, there's plenty of evidence of war crimes. You think about how many incidents there's been of Israel using an American bomb to commit some sort of war crime. But Kyle mentioned some specific ones here. In June, CNN reported that Israel used a U.S. small diameter bomb in an attack on a school that killed 40 civilians. And in October, the Washington Post reported that the Biden administration had received nearly 500 reports alleging Israel used U.S. supplied weapons for attacks that caused unnecessary harm to civilians in the Gaza Strip. And what did they do about all of those reports? They didn't do anything, even though they have this new mechanism they tried to implement, that if they got reports of civilian harm, they would review them and then take action based on that report. They haven't done that for a single one of these reports. Anything to ensure that the weapons keep flowing to Israel to continue to support this slaughter in Gaza. And they're doing it all the way up until they're out of the door. All right, so the next one here, Blinken is not worried that the world may think he's backed a genocide. So Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in an interview published by the New York Times on Saturday that he's not worried that the world might view him as a genocide supporter for his role in backing Israel's actions in Gaza. So I just want to play this clip here. I got this from Asal Rod on X.com. She's a good follow, but I just want to play the clip because just reading it doesn't really do it justice. There's something about the way Blinken answers here.
Do you, Secretary Blinken, worry that perhaps you have been presiding over what the world will see as a genocide?
No, it's not, first of all. Second, as to how the world sees it, I can't fully answer to that. But everyone has to look at the facts and draw their own conclusions from those facts. And my conclusions are clear.
Do you, Secretary Blinken?
So there's just something about the way he answers there. The way he says no, and then it's not, just denying, again, that it's a genocide, but just doesn't seem to have any sort of remorse there. And this whole interview, that he did with the New York Times, was kind of a review of the Biden administration's foreign policy, which has just been a complete disaster from Ukraine to Gaza and in other areas as well. And he just seems completely delusional. He portrays the war in Ukraine as a victory, as a success, even though, there's no path to Ukrainian victory. All these people have died, and, there's just, again, no chance that Ukraine's going to push the Russians out or anything. And he was asked, do you think it's time to end the war in Ukraine? And said, oh, that's up to the Ukrainians. That's a decision for the Ukrainians to make. It's all up to them. But, you go back, and that has been the line of the Biden administration. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And that was essentially their line, to have an excuse for why they weren't talking to Russia, why they weren't engaged in diplomacy with Russia to try to end the war. But you go back to the early days of the war, March and April of 2022, there was a peace deal on the table. And what did the U.S. do? Did they let, Ukraine do what it wanted? No, they discouraged them from signing the deal and said, hey, we'll fund this war. We don't want you signing this now. Now, almost 3 years into the war, I mean, that's a tragedy. Next month is going to be 3 years of this war. And what has Ukraine gained from it? But you should go check out the interview. I linked to the archive version, the New York Times, if you want to read it. It's just, again, just completely delusional. His review of the Biden foreign policy and what's going to be his legacy. And his legacy is going to be genocide in Gaza and this disastrous proxy war against Russia. All right, so the next one here, report says Israel's considering cutting aid to Gaza even more under Trump. So Israel is considering limiting humanitarian aid deliveries into Gaza even more once President-elect Donald Trump is inaugurated on January 20th. And this was reported by CNN on Saturday, citing an Israeli official. So in recent months, the amount of aid entering Gaza has reached all-time lows as the Israeli military has been conducting an ethnic cleansing campaign in northern Gaza that involves a total siege, and this began in early October, as we've been covering a whole bunch on this show, even though it barely gets any acknowledgement in Western media that it is an ethnic cleansing campaign that's happening. The Biden administration claimed it was concerned about the aid restrictions. And if you remember, back in October, they gave Israel a 30-day time limit to allow up to 350 aid trucks to enter the Strip per day. When the deadline came in November, Israel was not anywhere close to that number. If anything, the aid levels the aid levels were actually worse than they were when they gave them the letter. But the Biden administration said there would be no consequences, and U.S. weapons continued to flow. So the UN's Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said that 2,205 aid trucks entered Gaza in December, which is about 71 per day. Again, nowhere near that 350 that the U.S. is asking for. And the Israeli official speaking to CNN claimed that the purpose of limiting aid even more would be to deprive Hamas of resources, although a lot of armed gangs have been looting this aid due to the lack of security in Gaza, Israel dismantling the police force. So, this is something I bet we're going to see, is them cut aid even more, if not just do a complete total siege of the whole Gaza Strip. Amit Siegel, he's a journalist for Israel's Channel 12. A few weeks ago, he reported that Trump had sent a message to Israel that basically suggests he's not going to care if any aid's getting in at all. He wrote, this is again the reporter, he wrote on X, quote, Trump sent messages to Israel, I won't insist on humanitarian aid as Biden did, end quote. So if you remember, Israel initially imposed a total siege on Gaza in the aftermath of the October 7th Hamas attack. There's the now infamous quote from Yoav Gallant, who was the defense minister at the time. He said, quote, I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we will act accordingly, end quote. And so Blinken, he's taking credit for getting the Israeli government to agree to allow some aid into Gaza. He said in this New York Times interview that, he said, I put all this effort in to get aid in. And he said kind of an interesting quote here. He said it wasn't just, Israeli officials who didn't want aid in. It was the whole Israeli society, after October 7th. I'll read the quote. He said, quote, this wasn't just the prime minister or a given leader in Israel. This was an entire society that didn't want any assistance getting to a single Palestinian in Gaza, end quote. So while Israel has allowed some aid into Gaza, overall the deliveries are still very restricted. U.S. government agencies had previously concluded that Israel was deliberately blocking aid, which is very obvious, and that violates U.S. foreign assistance laws. But Blinken overrode those concerns to ensure that U.S. weapons continue to flow to Israel. And again, that is going to be his legacy. All right, so the next one here, Israeli attacks kill 88 Palestinians in Gaza. So Gaza's health ministry, this is a tough picture in this story, just a heads up if you're watching. Gaza's health ministry said Sunday that Israeli attacks killed at least 88 Palestinians and wounded 208 more, as Israel has stepped up its bombing of the besieged enclave in recent days. And this was in the previous 24-hour period. Al Jazeera reported on Sunday that Israeli attacks across Gaza killed over 200 Palestinians over the past 3 days. And Al Jazeera reporter said that they're seeing women and children making up the vast majority of casualties. You see this picture, just horrible picture here of this kid, a young little kid with his leg blown off after an Israeli strike. This is in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. And again, there's just so many pictures like this that you see every single day. So another thing that happened on Sunday, an 8th Palestinian baby died of hypothermia due to exposure from living in a tent. And then some of the Israeli strikes on Sunday included a drone strike near the southern city of Khan Yunis that killed at least 5 Palestinians. And then there was in central and northern Gaza, Wafa reported that at least 9 Palestinians were killed. So one thing that's concerning, since Thursday, Israel has significantly stepped up attacks on the Gaza Governorate. So this is the province of Gaza, which includes Gaza City. So it's also called the Gaza City Governorate. But they've really increased attacks, and it seems like they've tightened the siege on it. And so people are worried now that the Israeli military is moving this ethnic cleansing campaign, which is known as the Generals Campaign, further south. As we've been talking about since early October, the IDF has been conducting this ethnic cleansing in the North Gaza Governorate. I always have trouble with that word, but it basically means province. And this includes the cities of Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, and Jabalia. This is where they've been forcing everybody out under threat of death and then demolishing all the buildings. So now there's some signs that they might be doing this in Gaza City. And that's what the general's plan calls to do this in all of the northern Gaza Strip, north of the Netzarim corridor, which includes Gaza City. So it looks like there's a chance that this is underway. And you read that New York Times report. I wish the New York Times reporter asked, was even aware. It seems like she's not even aware of what's actually happening on the ground. These are the questions you got to ask people like Blinken is, oh yeah, well, you say all this stuff. What about this ethnic cleansing campaign that's happening right now on the ground? They're demolishing all these buildings. Here's all this evidence for it. It's reported widely in Israeli media. Israeli soldiers openly talk about it and post about it on social media. What do you have to say for that? But of course, we don't get those questions. I'll say in the State Department press briefings, there's journalists who do a good job in there, but those guys are really good at dancing around questions, and they're just completely shameless. I guess Blinken is shameless too. But anyway, so the violence, just the daily violence, it's just really horrific in Gaza. And then these signs that things are going to get worse with more aid restrictions, just a complete nightmare. All right, so the next one here, Israeli lawmakers demand complete cleansing of northern Gaza. This article is from Brett Wilkins. At least 7 far-right members of the Knesset, Israel's parliament, are calling on the country's defense minister to order the total destruction of northern Gaza's food, water, and energy sources, most of which have already been obliterated, and the killing of any Palestinian who isn't clearly surrendering to the attackers. In a letter to Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz, dated December 31st, the lawmakers assert that the Israeli Defense Forces campaign to forcibly expel Palestinians from northern Gaza is not being done properly, and is not achieving the war objectives defined by the government, which includes dismantling Hamas's governing and military capabilities. The letter calls on the IDF to destroy all energy sources, including fuel, solar systems, generators, and power lines, destroy all food sources, including warehouses, water and water pumps, and lay siege and remotely kill everyone not flying a white flag of surrender. So they're essentially saying, ramp it up. You're not doing the ethnic cleansing enough. You got to ramp things up, get all these people out of here, or kill them all. And again, this was sent on December 31st. So there's a chance that, Katz, the new Israeli defense minister, I mean, he's really, really bad. There's a chance he's listening to these people, and that's why we're seeing this increase in attacks on Gaza City. All right, so the next one here. Israel rushes soldier out of Brazil to avoid war crimes probe. This is one from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. An Israeli soldier was immediately evacuated from Brazil by the country's embassy after a Brazilian court proposed investigating the man for committing war crimes. In response, Tel Aviv instructed its soldiers to be more careful about what they post on social media. I mean, it's really something, the things that these soldiers post, blowing up entire blocks in Gaza and pictures of themselves in like women's underwear, these women that they either killed or forcibly displaced. So the Hind Rajab Foundation, which is named after a 5-year-old Palestinian girl who was killed by Israel in Gaza, they filed a complaint that an Israeli soldier who entered Brazil had committed war crimes in Gaza. On Saturday, it was confirmed that a court opened an investigation. The foundation said that the soldier posted videos to social media where he destroyed Palestinian homes. So following the opening of the inquiry, Israel helped to move the man from Brazil to Argentina, and Israel told its soldiers to be careful what they post online. Yunus Tirawi, he's a Palestinian journalist. You can follow him on X. He's always posting just what the Israeli soldiers are posting, and it's really damning stuff, some of the things that they say and do. I mean, again, just demolishing places and making such light of it, All right, so the next one here, Syria's new justice minister oversaw executions. So videos have surfaced online of Syria's new justice minister, Shadi al-Waisi, overseeing the execution of 2 women in 2015 over charges of adultery and prostitution. So al-Waisi is part of the new Syrian government led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, which took power after ousting former President Bashar al-Assad on December 8th. So Verify Psy, which is a fact-checking organization, confirmed that it was, in fact, al-Waisi in the 2 videos that emerged online. And these videos are brutal. In one of them, he is seen reading a ruling that the woman was found guilty of corruption and prostitution and sentencing her to death. You see a screenshot from one of the videos here. This is the woman that was killed. That's right under him. In the other video, al-Waisi appears to be carrying a gun and tells a woman to sit down as she's pleading for her life. Once she moves down, another armed man shoots her in the head. At the time, al-Waisi was working as a judge enforcing Sharia law in areas of Syria's northwest Idlib province that were under the control of the al-Nusra Front, the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria that merged with other groups to form HTS in 2017. So this is, again, the justice minister of this new government is overseeing executions like this not just a few years ago. I mean, it really goes to show these are the people who the U.S. backed, the U.S. helped get in power, helped take over the country of Syria. This is who that, this is their history. This is what they've done. And an HTS official speaking to this fact-checking group confirmed that said, yeah, that this is him, but tried to downplay the video. So this official said, quote, "The content of the video presented to us documents the enforcement of the law at a specific time and place where the procedures were carried out in accordance with the laws in effect at that time and as part of a procedural agreement. However, we would like to point out that this process reflects a stage we have moved beyond," end quote. So not denying anything, saying, yeah, this is him, but oh, don't worry, we don't really do that anymore. And it's just the U.S. supported this takeover by this group. They went and sat down with their leader, Jelani, who was the founder of Al-Qaeda in Syria, went on his little rebranding campaign a few years ago. But again, this really goes to show who these guys are. This is who he appointed to be the justice minister, someone who oversaw this type of barbarity. All right, so the next one here, 100 killed in fighting between Syrian Kurds and Turkey-backed fighters. So really heavy fighting in northern Syria. This article is from Jason Ditz. Since the Syrian regime change, there has been almost constant fighting between the Turkey-backed Syrian National Army, the SNA, and the U.S.-backed Kurdish SDF. That fighting is escalating precipitously, with over 100 combatants killed over the last 48 hours and no sign of the fight slowing down. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported 85 SNA fighters, those are the Turkish-backed fighters, were killed in that span of time, along with 16 SDF fighters. Turkey's own defense ministry claimed that they had neutralized 32 Kurds across the north, but did not offer specific details. So it seems like the fighting is mainly around the city of Manbij, which the Turks have taken, and the groups that they backed have taken. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. The most of the casualties was actually around Kobane, another city in the north. But there's fighting, it seems like, just happening all over the north between the Kurds and Turkey and its allies. So very heavy fighting, and this is the U.S.'s allies in Syria, the SDF, fighting Turkey, a NATO ally. It's just a complete mess. All right, so the next one here, Israel launches major airstrikes against North Syria. This is another one from Jason. He wrote this up on Friday. So there was huge explosions in the northern Syrian city of al-Safiri, just east of Aleppo. There were at least 7 airstrikes reported against different targets in the city, mostly targeting defense industry factories, but also some hitting research centers in the area. The attacks were carried out, this was overnight Wednesday into Thursday morning. Locals said the explosions were so huge that they turned night into day. There are still no official figures on the casualties from any of these latest attacks. And I haven't seen any update or anything on casualties, but Israel has bombed Syria probably around, it's something like they've launched around like 1,000 airstrikes in Syria since the regime change. And, you know, their reasoning for it, they're happy that Assad is gone. They say, oh, he was the big threat, but now we have to bomb, you know, this completely, they just want a completely neutered Syria that just doesn't have a military at all. But at the same time, they did also help the HTS guys take over by launching all these airstrikes against the Syrian government in the months and weeks leading up to the offensive. All right, so the next one here, Ukraine launches new offensive in Kursk. This is another one from Kyle Anzalone. So Ukraine doubled down on its offensive into Russia by ordering forces to try to take more Russian territory. The new push follows the U.S. counseling Ukraine to retreat from Russian territory before its forces are encircled. On Sunday, the Russian Defense Ministry said, quote, at around 9 a.m. Moscow time, in order to stop the offensive by the Russian troops in the Kursk direction, the enemy launched a counterattack by an assault detachment consisting of 2 tanks, 1 counter-obstacle vehicle, and 12 armored fighting vehicles, end quote. And Ukrainian officials unofficially confirmed the offensive. So this is, again, after we've seen these reports that basically Russia is pushing them out of Kursk, and the U.S. is saying that the Ukrainians should retreat or they're at the risk of being encircled. They launch a new push here, maybe just an attempt to try to hold on to some of this Russian territory before negotiations might happen with Trump coming in. We'll see if they looks like they took a little village, a little chunk of territory, but nothing really significant yet. We'll see what happens. All right, so the next one here, Moscow vows response after Ukraine fires more U.S. ATACMS. So on Saturday, Russia said that Ukrainian forces fired more U.S.-provided Army tactical missile systems into Russian territory. Those are the ATACMS missiles. The Russian Defense Ministry said Ukraine fired 8 ATACMS into the Belgorod Oblast and that they were all downed by Russian air defenses. So they're saying it doesn't sound like they really did any damage. But the ministry said that they're going to retaliate. There will be retaliation for this attack. So we've seen there's been several rounds of Ukrainian ATACMS strikes inside Russia since Biden signed off on these attacks back in November, which of course was a huge escalation. Russia's responded in a few different ways in response to kind of the initial attacks. They test fired that Airstrikes missile, this new intermediate range hypersonic ballistic missile. And as far as I understand it, it was not packed. There was no explosives in the warheads. So it was a test launch. It didn't really do much damage in Ukraine, but they basically showed that they have this new missile. And if it is, packed with explosives, it's going to be a huge attack. So there's always that possibility. Right now, with Trump coming in, I don't expect Russia to do anything major. Recently, a few weeks ago, there was another Ukrainian ATACMS strike, and Russia bombed Kiev pretty heavily one day and said that it was their response. So I kind of expect something like that to happen again, just more strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure. But there's just always that risk of some other bigger escalation. All right, so the last story here, Israeli defense minister says Lebanon deal may be scrapped entirely. So with this article's from Jason Ditz. With just a few weeks left in the 60-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, it seems increasingly that not only will the war resume after that, but the ceasefire may not last, even in pretense for the whole 60 days. Israel continues to commit dozens of violations daily, attacking southern Lebanon and invading new towns that they hadn't occupied during the war itself. Maroun al-Ras and Burj al-Mukuk were the latest areas to be taken by Israeli troops. So now Katz, the Israeli defense minister, he's claiming that the main ceasefire threat is Hezbollah. He's accusing Hezbollah of not fulfilling the ceasefire, even though Israel has violated it so much. And Hezbollah, as far as I know, only fired 2 rockets at one point here. But basically, there's reports that Israel intends to inform the U.S. that it plans to stay in Lebanon after the deadline. And what Hezbollah has been hinting at and saying is that if Israeli troops do stay past the deadline, then we're going to start attacking them. And then this whole war could, again, it hasn't ended. It's just Israel's been violating the ceasefire and bombing Lebanon, and Hezbollah hasn't been fighting back. But if Israel stays past the 60 days, I think we might see this thing really blow up again. All right, so that is it for the news for today. I was thinking about doing an update on the situation with the Cybertruck bombing, Livelsberger, the name of the Green Beret who did that. There was some kind of strange stuff that came out over the weekend. Kind of raised more questions than anything. There was one email that he supposedly sent to this guy who went on the Sean Ryan Show, which is a podcast. In that email, he said he had knowledge of war crimes in Afghanistan, something about Chinese drones being the things that people have been seeing on the East Coast, claiming it was some kind of new technology. But at the same, the way they presented it in the podcast was like, oh, he might be still alive and he has all this information. But if you read the email, he acknowledges in the email that he has a car bomb in his car at the time, which of course is a huge red flag. So if the email is real and he's saying he has a car bomb, sane people don't drive around with their cars packed with explosives. There was also these documents that the feds put out. They claim they got it from his notes on his phone that was in the car when it blew up, but they were able to get it out. Just kind of ramblings, saying it didn't really make much sense, saying the reasons why he was doing what he was doing. Then there's a video that came out of the explosion, and the feds are saying that he shot himself in the head with a Desert Eagle, which is a super powerful pistol. But you don't really see, he looks alive right before the explosion, so that's kind of confusing. So I had so much other stuff to do today, I just kind of, I didn't write an update on that, but maybe I'll do something tomorrow if things kind of clear up more. But the whole thing is just very strange. There's a lot of different theories, of course, and everything. But anyway, so that's it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. One from Joseph Terwilliger, How the Foreign Agents Law is Used to Silence American Dissidents. One from John Sopko, America, Afghanistan, and the Price of Self-Delusion. One from Jacob Makakama and Jeff Kosif, banning TikTok would violate America's free speech tradition. One from Yoel Elizer, inside the minds of IDF soldiers who commit war crimes. And our spotlight from Doug Bandow, is Trump's bombast good diplomacy? So please go check all that out. That's everything for me. I hope everyone had a good weekend. You could always support us by sharing the show, like, subscribe, comment. All that stuff helps out. Follow us on social media. We're all over now. Instagram, X, TikTok, antiwar.com. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.